Welcome to the Pen to Publish podcast with your hosts, Alexa Whitten, author, typesetter, and independent publisher, and
Alexa Tewkesbury, author, editor, and proofreader.
Hi, and welcome to episode 6, How to Get into the Writing Habit. Now, this is probably what most authors get frustrated by. They know they want to write, they may even have a plan in place, but how do they actually then do the stuff, as in do the writing? Today, Alexa One and I are going to talk about how long you need to put aside to writing, why getting into the habit is a good practice, and I'm also going to share a very important tip about motivation, but more about that later. So, Alexa One, I think you've got a fairly common question that most new authors ask, don't you?
Yes, I have. A lot of new writers want to know, how long does it take to write a book? If you want to write a book, no one can really tell you how long it's going to take for any length of book, but you can get a feel for your own writing speed. Now, word counts will vary depending on your target market, and in episode 3 we talked in detail about word counts for the various age categories in children's books. And for an adult novel, I would say you're aiming at 80,000 to 100,000 words. And once you have that rough word count in your head for your particular project and you start to write, that's after all your planning, you can then see how long it takes you to write, say, 1,000 words. When you know that, do your multiplying to work out very roughly the number of hours you're going to need to set aside. Now, I say very roughly because there will be good writing days when it flows, and there'll be bad writing days when you sit and stare at your screen and wish you were anywhere else in the world. But it does give you a bit of a guide.
Yes, this is a formula I use a lot with my writing clients. We take a look at how long 1,000 words say, and then we establish the sort of size of book that they want. So we do that right at the beginning. And then we work out how many hours it'll take to write those many words. They then can see how many hours in a week they can take to devote to their writing. Most of my authors find that actually writing in one big chunk is the best rather than, say, an hour a day. As busy business owners, stopping an hour a day to go into their writing nook or habit is quite difficult. Whereas being able to schedule a 3-hour window seems to work much better for them. I then get them to schedule this into their diary and make them treat it as though it's an appointment with somebody so that they then don't cancel. This way, they can turn off their phone, turn off their emails, and just get on with the work. I'm not sure this is quite the same with fiction.
Well, I think really it's the same with any writing, because whatever you want to write, the chances are you already have a busy life, and somehow within that, you have to try to develop a regular writing habit. Because if you really want to get your book written, a habit is what it needs to be, where you commit, as you say, to sitting down and just getting on with it. How, when, and where you write will all be very personal to you, and those things are going to depend on you and your own circumstances. But here are some things to think about. So the first one is, when are you at your most productive? Is it morning, afternoon, or evening? Can you find a regular daily writing slot in your optimal creative time? The daily part is important. By doing it daily, there's more chance of it becoming a habit that will stick. And I think as well for fiction writers, if you're trying to immerse yourself into the story that you're writing, it's a lot easier to do that if you don't have big breaks in the middle. If you have a busy work and family life, is it realistic for you to get up an hour or two early so that you can fit in dedicated writing time? Or maybe you work better at the end of the day so you could write in the evening instead of watching TV. Now, if you think this sounds problematical for you, I find it problematical too. I'm self-employed and my workday often extends several hours in both directions at the beginning and at the end of the day so that I can meet deadlines. I've mentioned in a past episode of fiction podcast I'm writing, and I find scheduling the time for it really tricky. If I try to write just 30 minutes at the end of the workday, often I find I've encroached onto that half hour with work and I haven't left myself enough time for I need to go and cook or whatever I have to do next. And if I try and write at the start of the day and it begins to take off and go really well, the last thing I want to then do is break off and start work. So I think you'll find that you have to be strict with yourself one way or another. And I agree with Alexa too. If you can find bigger chunks of time, I think you'll be able to work more productively. But if all you can manage is 30 minutes a day, then that's still so much better than no minutes. But whatever time slot you decide on, do put it in your diary or set an alarm on your phone. Just ring fence that time however you need to and stick to it as far as you possibly can.
I think you've also hit upon a very important point here, and this is an exercise I get my clients to do as well. When are you most productive? I always thought that I was an evening person, but actually for things like writing and client work, I'm much better early in the morning, even at 6 a.m. And I know that sounds harsh, but during the summer in lockdown, I found myself so busy with client work. I was having to get up early to get in those extra hours of work. However, I also realized I was most productive at this time. So you might need to experiment when you're most in the flow, and it might be different from what you think it is. So then build your habit when that time is, be it daily or weekly, and use those golden hours wisely.
And when it's a struggle to keep to that commitment you've made to yourself, just try and remember how much you want to write this book, and also how much your target audience is going to thank you for writing this book, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. The second thing I think that you can do is, when you've established a time slot, then you need to find somewhere to write. Now, can you find a physical space within your home where you can write that's quiet and where you can be undisturbed? Now, I've read how it's great to have a set writing space, so the same place you always go to do your writing, because when you're there, it puts you in the writing frame of mind. And I don't know whether you saw this photo ever in your life, Alexa, too, but I always remember seeing a wonderful photo of Roald Dahl where he wrote sitting in an armchair with a blanket over his knees in a hut in his garden. And I sometimes think it was that photo that made me want to write, because I just love this idea of having my little place where I went.
I actually think it's in the film. I saw the film over Christmas, and there is a shed in his garden where he goes to write, and he literally sits in a little chair with his blanket over him.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. There's something really lovely about that. But so when I first started writing, I loved this idea of having a special writing place, and I set myself up in a corner of my bedroom, and that was it. That was where I always went to write. But that was a long time ago. And now, because I work from home full time, and I did, and because I'm in that space a lot, these days I'd rather be somewhere else to write, and in various different places. So I like to be outside if it's warm and sunny, or if I have the house to myself, I sometimes set myself up in a different room. I might even drive somewhere and write in the car with a fresh view. I find that my brain relaxes when I get out of my workspace and use a variety of surroundings when it's possible. And that's a real boost to my creativity.
Business writers might not have that luxury of being able to take time out of the office, but I understand that's a really good idea. But as I said before, turning off the phone or your email notifications will actually help a lot. Some of my authors actually book a writing week where they take themselves off into a hotel and just get their book written, or at least the majority of it. This can be a great way of being away from distraction and work life, and has been a fabulous way for my authors to get big chunks of their book written.
And that sounds fantastic. You could, yeah, wake up in a hotel. I just love that. You've probably got a beautiful view, pool. I could write like that. But anyway, I would say do what works for you. Go where feels comfortable. Make a dedicated space if you can and you want to, or just write in bed if that's what you'd rather do. I think it's just important to support yourself in whatever way you need to make your writing into a habit. Thirdly, let's talk about productivity. Now, we spoke a lot about planning your book last week, and to begin with, the writing time you set aside is likely to be planning time, because that needs to be done too. And honestly, with a good solid plan in place, each time you sit down to write, you'll be so much more productive, because you'll know before you start that day which section of your book you're going to be working on. Now, an editor colleague of mine called Janie Burton, she's written a really great blog post, actually, that's full of tips for finding the time to write and being productive. And there'll be a link to her post in the show notes. And I really recommend reading it to inspire you. One of the things Janie suggests is setting micro goals. So a micro word count goal or a micro time goal. And I think this is so helpful. If finding the time to write is really difficult, then tiny is good. Tiny means you will get it done. You could try to committing to 10 or 15 minutes a day. That's all. Just 10 or 15 minutes, or aim for 100 words per day. Now, it sounds like nothing, but that's the whole point. 15 minutes or 100 words a day are achievable. And if you know that's all you're asking of yourself, you'll be able to do it. Especially if you've created a plan first and you know what that 100 words is going to be about. And the chances are, as you keep achieving your 100 words, you'll feel encouraged and motivated to write more each time you sit down to it.
That's a really good point. Set yourself small goals and you're much more likely to then start. Now, if you remember, I said I was going to share one really important tip at the beginning of the podcast. And this is what it is. Don't wait to be motivated. If you wait to be motivated, you probably won't ever feel ready, in inverted commas. The secret to motivation, and this can be anything that is difficult, is to just start. The tip that Alexa One has just shared about starting with, okay, I'm only going to write 100 words or just 10 minutes, then that breaks down the barrier of resistance because you know you're only committing to a small amount of time. I mean, who doesn't have 10 minutes? But I bet once you start, the 10 minutes will then turn into 15, 20, no doubt longer. Starting is usually the hard part. Being motivated once you're started, as in you're doing it, is much easier. I use this when I go for a run. I find if I say to myself, I'm going to go for a 5K run, I'm much more resistant to go. But if I say to myself, I'm only going to go for a 1K run, I know that's easy. And then when I'm running, I hit the 1K, usually motivated then to then do more. So don't wait for motivation, start, then motivation will hit.
I think it's important to remember as well that being productive isn't necessarily about the quantity of writing you produce. I mean, it's not even necessarily about the quality at this point. It's about the focus that goes into whatever number of words you get down. So write daily, and if you possibly can, without getting distracted, and just let the words tumble out. Don't go back and start rewriting yet. Don't get hung up on one sentence. You're not striving for perfection at this stage. You just want to get your story or your non-fiction idea down.
And this is very true. Don't edit at this stage to perfection. Not only will it hinder you, but it will cause you delays, and imposter syndrome will set in. You just need to get the stuff out of your head and onto your computer. Remember, this is what editors are for. They turn your writing into the magic that it becomes.
Well, finally, today, we've briefly mentioned in previous episodes the format you need your manuscript to be in before you send it to an editor or a typesetter. So just to reiterate, a handwritten manuscript really isn't acceptable these days. Assuming you intend to put your book through all its paces once it's written, that includes the editing and proofreading processes, working in a Word document is the very best thing you can do. Most editors edit in Word. That's their preferred format. Now, we're going to be looking in detail at the editing side of preparing your book for publication in the next series, but for now, I would just say, please use and submit your manuscript in Word. Also remember that you don't need to design the pages. You're not trying to reproduce the appearance of a published book in the document. Your typesetter, like Alexa 2, will do this for you. All you need to do is type your story or your non-fiction manuscript in a lovely, clear, easily readable font. Times New Roman is great, and I also really like Calibri. That's the one I usually use. Editors need to be able to focus on the material, not be struggling to read a fancy font. And Alexa 2, I imagine that's the same for typesetters?
Oh my, yes. Please don't spend time putting a header or footer on your document. That's probably the number one thing that really annoys me, and it's the first thing I delete. However, one thing I will say, and I don't have time really to go into too much detail about style sheets, but Word has a fantastic styling option called Style Sheets. And what this does is it denotes your headings. Now, this is much more applicable for business style books because you no doubt will have a heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. And if you use the style sheets, what that does is it creates a navigation pane, and then you can see the whole outline of your book. I've written a fantastic blog post that talks you through exactly how to use style sheets within your Word document, and I'll be including that in the show notes. There's also a YouTube tutorial as well.
I think that's about it for the writing habit. Now, next week, we're going to address that thorny problem, the dreaded writer's block. And we'll give you some pointers and some suggestions to help you overcome it. So hopefully you'll find something useful there.
Writer's block is something everyone faces at some point, so do tune into that. So that's a bye-bye from me.
And bye from me. Bye.